I'm Mayor Victoria Woodards.
And I'm City Manager Elizabeth Pauley.
Welcome back to Inside Tacoma. Well, we are again, Elizabeth. I think this is our fourth show. We're back and we've got a lot to talk about today. So we're going to start with Inside Insights.
And Mayor, the council really recently took action to adopt what's known as a camping ban. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So let's give just a little bit of history first, right? So on May 9th, 2017, the council then, I wasn't a member of the council at the time, but declared a public health emergency related to homelessness.
And Mayor, that's right after I took my position as interim city manager, so I remember that well.
That's probably one of the first big pieces of legislation that policies that we passed that you had to go and then implement. And then, and the council did that, as I understand it at this time, to really address the growing issue around homelessness in our community, and as a way to really focus on helping those who were houseless in our community. Now, when I came on board in November of 2019, we then extended the first reading and final reading of the ordinance to extend the declaration of this state of emergency. And I think in that we said that the ordinance would stay in place until 95% of those who are homeless in Tacoma had shelter.
Right, using that the measure where we do that point in time count,
right.
We try to get an estimate of those experiencing homelessness in the community. Yes, the council did tie the emergency declaration to that measure at that time.
And I think that's really important. And I know a lot of people talk about the homeless point in time count, and a lot of people say that that the issue is bigger than those numbers, but we got to start somewhere. And so I think it's a great place to start. And if we can get to 95% of that, then we can keep going. But we've got a ways to go before we can get there.
Right. And so again, what is this recent legislation that the council passed?
So for me, this legislation, and for the council, I think as a whole, even though it was a split vote on the council, was really to think about how we can continue to address the needs of those of our entire community, for those who are housed and those who are houseless, and how can we support those who are in shelters and trying to get their lives back on track. And so what it really is, and we'll put a map up on the screen so that people can really see what it is. And what it really does is it identifies all of the sanctioned shelters that the city of Tacoma is engaged in Tacoma, and it puts a 10-block buffer around those particular shelters. Now, as you can see just from the map, it doesn't include the whole city. And part of this was to do a couple of things. One, to make sure that those who are seeking shelter and who are in these shelter spaces can really focus on getting back to a place where they can sustain themselves. And so the ability to feel safe and secure in these shelters is what's really been part of the conversation. The other piece of that is for our neighborhoods, who have stood up and said, we can take the Sixth and Orchard Thames site, right? That while the neighbors didn't want it at first, now that it's there, they're like, we took on a Thames site, and it is wonderful and amazing for our community. There's one right around the corner from my house at 69th and Proctor. Right. And so these communities stepped up, or at least even if they didn't step in the beginning, accepted those shelters, those micro shelters, and are now, they're a part of the community boards. They're fully supporting these shelters, and they want those who are agreeing to get shelter to be able to have everything they need to be successful and to not be distracted by what used to be for them. And so I think for me, that's the biggest part of it, right? Is to how do we say to Tacoma and to those who are unhoused that we really want to really give you everything you need to be successful. And I think this is a part that does that.
So what do the buffers mean then, Mayor?
So we did a couple things, right? We did it around in current sanctioned encampments, and then we did it around waterways, because we also understand that we've got to protect our waterways. And so in working with the Puyallup tribe, we talked about, what water areas do we really need to be careful of to preserve? We spend a lot of time cleaning up our waterways. We want to make sure that they stay that way. So there's a 200-foot buffer around waterways, and there's a map online, much like this, that people can go and look at. And then for those who are actually in areas where there are sanctioned encampments, then it's a 10-block buffer around the encampment. And I think we did pass an amendment last week that if the 10-block buffer is in the middle of a building or in the middle of a block, then we go to the end of the block, just so that the 10-block radius is easy to see. Now, let's just be honest. This is not our response to solving homelessness.
It's important to understand that.
It really is, Elizabeth. I mean, this is not the thing that we say, okay, this is going to fix all of homelessness in our city. No, absolutely not. We are focused on finding houses and finding shelter as we transition to more affordable places for people to live. So this really is a tool in the toolbox to begin to really address the street homelessness that exists in Tacoma. But it is not. Let's just be clear, it is not part of our solving homelessness strategy.
No, in fact, the council recently heard about the comprehensive strategy and had an update, the comprehensive response that the city has to homelessness.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like the council was really focusing this ordinance on mitigating some of the effects that unsanctioned encampments have for those in the encampments and for those around the encampments, and even for the environment in the cases of our waterways.
Absolutely. So Elizabeth, this is a perfect example of why we do this show, right? So the council, in fact, passed this piece of policy. And in it, there are some things that now have to be enforced.
Right.
And so Elizabeth, so then once we pass that policy, and we know that the idea of the policy was to really get compliance and get people to volunteer. It wasn't to voluntarily comply, not to fine them or to have them admitted to jail. That's not the goal. But so we've passed this, and now you have to implement it. So talk a little bit about the strategy and how administration will then take this policy and apply it.
Sure. In many ways, our administrative response is going to look very similar to what it's looked like prior to this ordinance being adopted by the council. And what that means is our team, which is based in our Neighborhood and Community Services Department, we referenced it as our HEAL team, that also partners with our Tacoma Police Department. It means that team will look at the encampments that exist in the city, both in those buffer zones that you've talked about today, and we will continue to look at the encampments that are outside of those zones, and focusing on those in the zone for a minute, the buffer zones. Our team will go out just as they do today with encampments and focus on engagement with the individuals at that site. We will be letting individuals at the site know and posting those sites that this is a site where camping is specifically banned in the city of Tacoma. We will also be handing out this map and talking about the map, but that's going to be combined again with the effort that we always make, which is to find out who's in that encampment and what services do they need, and offering those services to the individual. And those services involve making clear what shelter availability we have in the city, and what other services, like perhaps the person needs medical care, or some access to mental health or substance use disorder kinds of programming. And we also make sure that we're making those service offers to the individuals. That will look the same.
Absolutely.
What's a little bit different now is
because people want to now know if we're doing that already. And I think some of this ordinance actually codified some of the work that already happens in the way that it happens.
In many ways, yes. With the substitute ordinance, there's a requirement that when there is an encampment in one of these zones that is not our sanctioned shelter site, we will be posting a notice 2 weeks ahead of any efforts to remove individuals from that site. The purpose of that notice is to make it really clear that you're in this zone where camping is, these camps are banned, and that it will allow some of our great community partners to be on notice and to come forward with the services that they can add to the individuals at that site. So it ensures really clarity of the notice, and it ensures that that service offer opportunity extends to that through that 2-week period. And that's a little bit different. We often give 2 weeks notice, but the requirement right now is 72 hours of notice. We still would have the right, if we have any issues with really severe public health or community safety issues, to move quicker. But we expect that our policy, which we do adopt and will be refining, our encampment policy, our response, which is really a public safety related and focused policy. Public health and safety, I should say, focus policy. We'll be refining that given what council passed, and again with focus on service. After that 2-week period where people are on notice, we've offered service, we will be working towards voluntary compliance of moving from that zone and from that site, and hopefully moving into shelter or housing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the end goal for us, is
Absolutely.
housing. And Elizabeth, you mentioned a group in your comments, and that's really our community partners. And I think, as I so often say, you know, we're stronger together, we'll work better when we work together. And I think we are so lucky in Tacoma to have community partners who, once we post a notice or once we inform them that we're going to, that they automatically deploy their service teams and go out and help those who are houseless get into a shelter or to get the services that they need. And I would also add to that, it's not just that they do it when we've posted the removal of an encampment.
They're out there every day.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
so grateful for their partnership in this work. And it was a long meeting and a lot of testimony. But I think what's so important is that everyone is concerned. I think it was said Tuesday night, everyone who sits on that dais and everyone who was in that room or virtually attending, or didn't even engage in that conversation, but care. I think this is a community that really cares about those who are houseless, and we want to find the best solutions. And so I think Councilmember Hines, and want to give him credit, because this really was the legislation, the policy that he picked up and really helped to bring forward. But I think what's important for everyone to know is that talk to us in 90 days, because that was a part of the component too, isn't it, Elizabeth? There's some report back component of it?
I was going to mention that, Mayor. I think that is reflective of what the council's intention here, that we really carefully look at how this works, how we end up administering, what issues are we seeing, are we easing some of the pressures on our existing shelter sites, and what's happening with the services that we're offering. And so we're going to be collecting those, that data, much of which we collect now, but this really locks it in of what we need to be collecting and regularly reporting back.
Absolutely.
So we'll be back frequently before council and in the public setting, public meetings, to share what our experience with administering this ordinance is. And the council was really, it was important to the council to have that embedded in the ordinance itself. So I know we'll learn more from this, and we'll be back to share that with the public.
And not just to share it, but to make adjustments where we need to.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope this was informative to everyone else. It's always great to be able to talk about, especially current policy that we've passed, because that's the whole purpose of the show.
It's been on a lot of people's minds.
It absolutely has. Yeah. And we'll be coming back to talk to you in our Inside Tacoma segment, where we'll be talking with our budget officer. We'll be talking about the upcoming budget and some of the new fees that will be in that budget. We'll be right back.
Did you know that the City of Tacoma goes through the process of redistricting every 10 years, just like state and federal governments? In Tacoma, our city charter requires an assessment of population numbers every 10 years following the U.S. Census. Redistricting is an evaluation of voting districts to ensure an equal number of residents per district. Sometimes boundaries must be adjusted in order to maintain balance for fair and equal representation. This means each of the city's 5 council districts should have about 44,000 people per district, using 2020 census data. During the redistricting process, current district boundaries will be analyzed in order to balance population numbers without disrupting established hubs, like neighborhoods, business centers, or natural boundaries such as parks. Redistricting does not consider any one political party or group. The city's Geographic and Information Systems Department has analyzed 2020 census data and submitted draft boundary changes. The City Council is currently considering what an updated map will look like. You can also weigh in. In November, the City Council will select a final map with feedback from Tacoma residents. Do you have thoughts or ideas on what districts should look like? Leave your comments below and sign up for email updates.
In this month's Inside interview, we're talking with Budget Officer Katie Johnston about the city's biennial budget.
Welcome, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you on Inside Tacoma with us. You know, we are in the budget season. Most people would call this fall, we call it budget. But we're in the budget season, and we know that there are many moving parts in our budget, and Elizabeth and I have talked about, you know, kind of on the front of the show, the last couple of shows, we've talked a lot about the budget and the budget wheel and, you know, income and
revenue
and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but there are lots of things in the budget, and so I think it's a really great time for us to have a conversation kind of about what other things are in the budget that are really going to affect people who live and do business here in Tacoma. And I think two of those things are, you know, there's a budget license increase that we're examining this year, as well as an excise tax around litter and trash. So excited to kind of learn a little bit more and educate our community on what that means for them.
So Katie, starting with the business license fee increase. My understanding is we have not raised those license fees since 2017. We are obviously a growing city, growing needs, and we need to do some updating to reflect that because the associated costs that come with that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So the city hasn't increased its business licenses since the fee actually that's paid by businesses since 2017. In that same time, consumer price indexes that we're all very familiar with and feeling right now have increased by about 26% in that same period of time. And those are price increases that the city feels on providing very basic services. So making sure that we're keeping our fees and our revenues to keep up with those expense increases that are just naturally occurring to keep doing what we're doing is just really important to make sure that we're financially healthy as a city.
All right.
So we started looking at this budget development, looking at a pretty big gap, Katie, $24 million gap. And I know we looked at a lot of different ways. And in fact, in our proposed budget, there's some different ways that we've proposed closing that gap. Can you talk about those different ways?
Yes. So as we developed the budget, we really did look at how we spend and what we spend on. So Elizabeth, you work with our departments as well as me to really look at, are we providing these services efficiently? How much are we really spending on those different services? Do we need to update that? Sometimes that can be down, sometimes that can be up when we're really looking at what we're spending our resources on. Sometimes we look at, do we really need to be doing this anymore at the level that our communities needs? And then we also look at revenue options, and we look at that from both how are we projecting our revenues? Are we seeing kind of more positive trends in our revenues? And then ultimately we do look at updating our revenues. Business license fees is one area. We look at permit costs. We look at a lot of those different fees that we have in our organization to make sure that we're keeping up with the expenses.
So this business license fee is a source of additional revenue. How much revenue do we expect that to generate?
We expect to generate $3.5 million a year. So over the course of the biennium, that's really going to help us address both the gap that we originally projected, as well as continue to fund key essential services. So in this budget, we're not making cuts to public safety. We're not making cuts to affordable housing and homelessness. In fact, we're expanding services in both those areas.
Even as costs go up.
Even as costs go up. And in part, that is through the contribution that our businesses make. Our residents and our businesses pay taxes in addition to this fee that helps support those. But I would say that this increase is important for us to both maintain those services and expand to meet really key demands in both of those service areas.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we're talking, and I'm going to digress just a little bit, we're talking a lot about revenue. And so we talk about raising certain rates and finding potential revenue sources. But we also, I want to be clear to the public, is that as they heard, $3.5 million doesn't close that $24 million gap. And so we also made cuts in our budget. And I just want to be really clear about that. We didn't just think of ways to raise revenue. We also looked at how we could decrease our expenses in this budget time. And so it's a combination of decreasing expenses, as we do in our regular budgets, and then finding other ways to create more revenue to fill that gap. So I just wanted to make sure people know we're not just trying to tax our way out of this. We're trying to find, both ways to increase revenue and decrease expenses. So let's switch gears just a little bit. Along kind of the same vein of still talking about revenue generation for needed services, and as you said, very basic services, we also are looking at this excise tax. So Katie, can you talk to us a little bit about what this excise tax is? Who will it affect? How much is it? How much will people feel that? And what are we going to use the money for?
Yes. So the excise tax is actually a tax on a solid waste bill. And so what we're looking at is a 6% increase on our solid waste bills starting in April of 2023. That's for both residential and commercial customers of our solid waste services. We expect that means that our average residential customer with a 60-gallon container, they'd look at paying about $3 a month for these services. And so overall, we look at that bringing in about $7 million over the biennium to help us address litter and debris, to help us, it's gonna add a litter crew, address trail maintenance, all sorts of really essential services for our community, especially that we've seen coming out of COVID, that we really do need these services. And one of the things that I do just want to mention as well is we are planning to add funding for what we call our bill credit payment assistance program. And that will help offset the impacts of this tax on lower income households.
That is awesome. And it'll also continue things like Tidy Up Tacoma.
Yes.
And we've heard a lot of demand for that increased service level from the community. And Katie, you touched on the where these revenues will be, where we'll be focusing these revenues, what kind of services, but I think more is going to come about the detail on that. Am I right?
Yes, and so one of the things that's really important is we've outlined some key areas. As Elizabeth mentioned, we look at where we're seeing increased demand. So when we targeted things like litter and debris removal, we were looking at 311 calls. When we think about looking at neighborhood business district cans, we're responding to what we've heard from the community.
Right.
And so our environmental services that's planning to manage this now centralized function around litter and debris, they'll be doing outreach early next year to help make sure that we're really targeting these resources and these programs that we've identified to the best places.
Yeah, we want to use this new revenue with the most benefit to the community. So we'll be talking to the community.
Yes.
Thank you, Katie.
Absolutely. Well, we're in the midst of this budget cycle. And there are other opportunities, and we've got a little ways to go still. We've got presentations that are still happening. So Katie, can you just talk to us a little, like, what's the rest of the process look like, and share that with everyone?
So right now we're in a pattern, as you mentioned, Mayor, that every week departments are presenting to the City Council around their budget. So for members of the public who want to follow that, they can watch the study session presentations. They're really great overviews of what departments do and how we spend those resources on services. And so we'll continue having those presentations through early November. The Council will also have public hearings on November 1st and November 15th. And then on the 15th, we'll have the first reading of the ordinance. And this is one of those things that council has to look at twice. So adoption will actually happen on November 22nd. So we still have some time for people to watch those presentations, learn about the budget, provide some feedback before adoption.
So maybe just a little bit more on that feedback part. So you just described the process. Where in that process can people, and where and how can people provide feedback on the budget?
Yeah, I always think about feedback in two ways. One is about getting information. So we have a lot of places for people to get information right now. So they can go online and see our digital budget book. They can watch those study sessions that we mentioned. And then we also have something called a balancing act tool. So if people are interested in learning about how the general fund's proposed budget is allocated, and then this is where they can give us feedback too. They can reassign resources. ideas, tell us to spend money in other places, kind of restructure that general fund. They can use that and give us that feedback, also available on our budget website. And then we'll have a couple of public events. So we will have a town hall on November 3rd from 6 to 7 p.m. It's a digital town hall where people can come and ask questions and give feedback. And then, as I mentioned, we have two public hearings at our city council meetings on November 1st and November 15th at 5 p.m. Where people can come and give comment and tell us about where they really see either that the budget helps advance their priorities or places where they'd like to see us continue to work and either make improvements through resource allocation or really that they would like to direct the city towards specific services as well.
That's great. So there are still, the budget has not passed. There are still ways for everyone to engage. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that we can't wait to have you back after the budget passes, and let's talk about what's in the budget. And we're gonna take a quick break and go into our final segment, Inside Inquiry, where we'll answer your questions. We'll be right back on Inside Tacoma.
People in Tacoma of all ages and incomes deserve the opportunity to grow up and grow old in their community, which means we must increase housing choice, affordability, and supply. While there isn't an overnight fix, we can take steps today to allow for different types of housing that respect the scale and design of our neighborhoods while helping us thrive now, in a decade, and beyond. Learn more at cityoftacoma.org/home-in-Tacoma.
Welcome back to our final segment, Inside Inquiry, where there's an opportunity for you to ask the mayor and the manager specific questions that you want to know about Tacoma.
We hear from you in virtual forum, in community forum, on social media, and through constituent letters. And in this segment, we're going to answer some of your questions.
So let's dig right in, Elizabeth.
All
so
right.
The first question, we had a question that came in from Facebook. And it asked, is there any police presence around the Tacoma Mall? And they also asked about substations.
All right, so I'm really glad that this question was asked because the Tacoma Mall is a really important part of our community and
Absolutely.
our economy, and people want to feel safe when they go there.
Absolutely.
So, Mayor, there's actually quite a lot of police presence, and I just want to walk through some of the different ways that the police is working with and around the mall. So first of all, recently there has been a heightened police presence around the mall in terms of patrol whenever the call volume and the call priorities allow for that. But in addition, our police community policing staff, they meet regularly with Tacoma Mall security and management to understand what's happening there and to see how we can work well together. The chief himself recently attended a mall security conference with Simon Leadership ownership at the mall with the goal of enhancing the partnership at the mall. The mall itself often employs off-duty officers to help assist at the mall.
I've seen a few of them when I go there.
And you know, there's a deterrence effect that we hope for from that. And some individual businesses in the mall also employ off-duty officers as well. So our community liaison officers that the community loves so much often are conducting what they call high-profile patrols, and these are during the times of days that statistically tell us there's a higher crime level, and so they are ensuring that there's more patrol during those statistically high crime times frames. We also our department works on a holiday crime plan because there's sometimes, unfortunately, an increased level of activity, and so it really focuses our police resources on the mall and other centers of commerce during that active time. So I wanted the community to hear that we're conscious of that and that we have a plan around that. This plan really runs through from Thanksgiving through New Year's, and it involves visible police patrol callers as well as plainclothes officers. So that's part of the plan as well. And again, working closely with mall security.
Exactly. We do want people to go to the mall and spend money, but we want them to be safe. And I think there's also part of that we have to be responsible as shoppers. So not to leave packages on the back
There are
seat.
things we can always do. Yeah.
Lock them in our trunks. Let's not show all the goodies that we bought in the mall so that people go, oh, they've got stuff here. So we have to have a little bit of ownership in making sure that we are doing our part to not encourage folks to think there's something in our cars.
You're right, Mayor. And I just also want to mention some of the really important community events that are around the holidays, like zoo lights. Exactly. There's also planning, safety planning that goes around those, so that we want the community to know that we are looking to keep them safe in these areas and around these activities, Mayor.
That is awesome.
And so you mentioned substations, that there's also interest in our substations. What do we know?
We know we have 5 of them.
Okay.
In Tacoma, we have a central substation on Martin Luther King. We have a northeast substation on North Point Way. There is a substation at North 26, right? It's actually attached to the Boys and Girls Club and the brand new elementary school. We have a substation on South 72nd, and then there's a substation on East 56. So we have 5 substations. And
what happens at them?
Well,
Yeah.
It really is. I think some people think there's a substation there, and so there should be someone. They should be able to go knock on the door 24/7, and someone's in there. The goal is that the substation is a place for our officers to go to check in, to be able to file a report, to be able to take just a quick break, a lunch break, whatever that is. So it's used as a place for them to go in and out of. We unfortunately don't have the kind of staffing that would allow somebody to sit in the substation 24/7. And so if people are wondering, well, how come I never see anybody at the substation? The goal is that they're not sitting in the substation, that our police officers are out on the streets. And the other thing I would say to the mall, I think just a couple blocks from the mall is the police department. So while there's not a substation at the mall,
right,
the police department the whole department is there. So just a couple blocks away, much like a substation, but much busier than one of our substations.
And Mayor, some of our community partners also utilize or have historically utilized our substations, like Department of Corrections, so that has brought activity to the substations. COVID has interrupted a little bit of that, as well as our volunteers that were providing some presence at those substations. And we hope that those will be reviving now that the COVID horizon is a little bit different.
Absolutely. Well, Elizabeth, we got another question. We'll stick on the police topic for just a second, but we did get another question kind of asking, what's going on with this crime reduction plan and what it focuses on. So can you share, I know we have an update coming, but I'll let you kind of tease that out, but can you kind of share for those who haven't heard about it yet, kind of what we're doing and what they can expect?
Well, just as a reminder, our very first program, Mayor, back in June, we invited the chief in, and he gave us a little preview of the plan that they were working on at that time. And then on July 12th, there was a official rollout of that plan. And really it's important to remember that this is a violent crime reduction plan. So there's a very specific focus of this plan on crimes that are identified as violent crimes. And those are the kind of crimes that you can think of as happen to people, to individuals.
Right.
But it's also important to remember that while that program is focused on violent crime, there's 3 phases of that plan. The first phase is a hot spot policing phase that really talks about having visibility of the police in the right places at the right time to deter these crimes. Then the mid-range plan is bringing together a cross-functional group that's going to be really looking at these problem areas based on the statistics that we gather during this crime plan implementation, and looking at what kind of place-based policing and what other place-based changes can the city make to make that part of our community safer for everyone. And then last but not least, there's going to be some focused deterrence in the third phase of that plan. So it's exciting to note that on November 1st, we're going to hear about the first 90 days of that plan. And there's been maybe a little confusion around the 90 days.
July to November, Elizabeth, that's a little bit more than 90 days.
We aren't introducing introducing a new way to count. But what happens under this plan is we look at 90 days of data. And so after that 90-day period, our criminologists went to work and looking at the data. And the report out, which is now following that work process, is coming on November 1st to talk about what did we learn in that first 90 days. And we're going to be repeating that process of report out as we move forward.
Gotcha.
So we hope that a lot of our community will listen in and join us to learn about that.
So not every 90 days, but probably every 120, 150 days, we'll get the final report on what the last 90 days with the data told us. That's good, because I was like, 90 days? It's already been 90 days. So that's a good thing to remind community about.
So again, November 1st at our study session,
1st,
which is at noon. So yeah, we're looking forward to that and learning how the impact that we're having on violent crime in the community.
Well, I think the community is really anxious to hear on how we think it's going. And I think it's great also that the plan's not set in stone, so that when it does come back, we will have an opportunity, that the police department will have an opportunity to review and see where they need to make changes. That's the great thing about this plan, is it's very
adaptable.
nimble. Yep.
It's scalable and it's adaptable.
Absolutely.
And it's based on data.
Most importantly. Well, Elizabeth, I've got another question that came in that I kind of want to jump in around, and that's, everybody's hearing about redistricting and want to know what's going on with redistricting. We've got these great commercials that are running on TV 12, but just want to remind everybody that it is time. Every 10 years we do redistricting. It comes after the 10-year census. And so we are in the midst of doing that right now. So you'll get to see maps. If according to the 2020 census, each district should have about 44,000 people in it. So the goal is to adjust the boundaries so that we achieve that goal, so that every person in our city feels represented, and that every council member feels like they have a fair share of the city. And so I just want to remind everybody that maps are coming to the City Council in November. Want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to weigh in as it relates to redistricting, and invite you to go to cityoftacoma.org/redistricting. Again, cityoftacoma.org/redistricting, and you can then find out how you can weigh in. We need to hear from you before we get those maps passed. So looking forward to that as well, Elizabeth.
That is a hot topic, really nationwide. So I'm glad you touched on that, Mayor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again to talk about what's happening inside Tacoma. If you have any questions, be sure, you see we answer them right here on air. Be sure to either send them by Facebook or by email so that we can make sure that we're answering your questions. It's been a delight to be here with you again, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Inside Tacoma.